Dana White's patience for critics seems to be wearing thin these days, especially when it comes to fans complaining about fight cards before they even happen. Sitting down for a pre-fight Q&A ahead of UFC Vegas 110, the UFC CEO was hit with a question he's probably heard 1,000 times. Why are the next few cards so weak? His response was vintage Dana, blunt, dismissive, and entirely in character. How's it bad when it hasn't even happened yet? White fired back. Shut the fuck up. Watch it tomorrow, and if it's bad, tell me it's bad. It was classic White, the same energy he's brought to critics for years, but it also reflected a real truth about the UFC's current schedule. With over 40 events a year, not every card can be stacked with stars. UFC Vegas 110 and UFC Vegas 111 fall into that grinder category. Smaller Apex shows headlined by ranked fighters, but short on household names. For hardcore fans, they're fine. For casuals, they're easy to skip. UFC Vegas 110, headlined by Steve Garcia versus David Onama, doesn't boast the kind of names that draw big pay-per-view buzz, but it does have a few interesting matchups buried in the lineup. Waldo Cortez Acosta and Ante Delija are trying to break into heavyweight contention, while Ketlen Vieira versus Norma Dumont, two top 5 bantamweights, quietly carries divisional implications. These are the kind of fights that tend to surprise people once the action starts. Next week's UFC Vegas 111, on the other hand, has been tougher to defend. Gabriel Bonfim versus Randy Brown is a solid main event for the diehards, but even White would admit it's not exactly a headliner that moves numbers. Only Bonfim is ranked among the fighters featured on the main card. Still, there's enough competitive matchmaking in the prelims to keep things interesting. Mayra Bueno Silva versus Jacqueline Cavalcanti and Tisha Pennington versus Dennis Gomes both feature ranked women trying to climb back into contention. White's approach has always been to let the fighting speak for itself. He's been around long enough to know that a bad card on paper can turn into a highlight reel night once the cage door closes. He's also been quick to roast fighters or cards that underdeliver, so his confidence isn't necessarily blind loyalty. When fights flop, he usually admits it, but not before they happen. The reality is that the UFC is in a rhythm where Apex events are meant to keep the machine running between the bigger pay-per-views. They're tune-ups for divisions, proving grounds for rising contenders, and opportunities for matchmakers to find out who's ready for the next step. The payoff for fans comes with cards like UFC 322, a monster pay-per-view stacked with 2 title fights, including Islam Mokaev moving up to welterweight to challenge Jack Della Maddalena, and Zhang Wei Li jumping up from strawweight to meet Valentina Shevchenko for the flyweight crown. White knows not every weekend can be a blockbuster, but his message to critics remains the same. Watch the fights before you judge them. The Apex shows may lack star power, but they're often the place where the next breakout fighter gets discovered. And if a card really does turn out bad, well, Dana will be the first one to say it, just not before the first punch is thrown.
Norma Dumont's win over Ketlen Vieira at UFC Vegas 110 might go down as one of those fights that splits the MMA community right down the middle. After 3 competitive rounds, the judges rendered a split decision in Dumont's favor, her 6th consecutive victory and one that could propel her closer than ever to a women's bantamweight title shot. But the verdicts didn't come without controversy. The fight started slow, with both women testing distance and trading low-volume striking exchanges. Vieira tried to push the pace late in the opening round, finally securing a takedown and moving into a dominant position, even threatening an arm triangle choke as Dumont struggled to defend. Still, Dumont stayed composed and weathered the grappling storm, avoiding any real damage. In the second round, Dumont's striking began to shine. Her jab and counterhooks found a rhythm, and she seemed to be touching Vieira with more consistency, landing cleaner, sharper shots. Yet, as had been the pattern in the first, Vieira closed strong, dragging Dumont to the mat again in the final minute. Though she controlled from top position, she didn't generate much offense, leading many to wonder whether control time alone was enough to steal the round. The final frame saw Vieira again try to impose her grappling, pinning Dumont against the fence and stifling her movement for a large portion of the round. But Dumont broke free, reset, and landed several solid punches that helped her close out the fight on a strong note. Her striking output, though measured, was enough to convince 2 of the 3 judges she had done more damage overall. When the scorecards were read, 29-28 for Dumont, 29-28 for Vieira, and 29-28 for Dumont, the reaction was immediate. Some fans and analysts on social media called it fair and argued that Dumont's cleaner, more effective striking outweighed Vieira's control. Others were less forgiving, labeling it yet another example of inconsistent judging in MMA. Several fighters also chimed in online. Thiago Moses thought Vieira had done enough to win, while others like Aaron Bronstetter saw the second round as razor-thin, describing it as a coin toss. The common theme was that round 2 was the decider, close enough that whichever way it went, half the audience would be unhappy. For Dumont, the victory extends her win streak to 6 and strengthens her claim as a top contender in the bantamweight division. It also marked her first fight in over a year since defeating Irene Aldana at Noche UFC 2. The long layoff didn't seem to slow her much, even if the fight wasn't a barn burner. She stayed composed, showed improved striking patience, and proved again that she's hard to outwork over 3 rounds. Vieira, meanwhile, continues to struggle to build momentum. After showing flashes of promise with her grappling and pressure, she once again found herself on the wrong side of a close decision. It's been over 3 years since she strung together consecutive wins, and this loss could push her further down a crowded field where opportunities are scarce. For Dumont, however, this may be the win that finally puts her in line for gold. While it may not have been a statement finish, the 6-fight streak speaks loudly, especially in a division that's still searching for stability following the recent title shakeups. Whether the performance was dominant enough to convince the UFC brass to grant her a shot remains to be seen. But what's clear is that Dumont has quietly carved out her place among the elite, even if the judges' call left fans arguing long after the final horn.
Bo Nickal's name being bumped from the UFC 322 main card to the prelims definitely raised some eyebrows, especially considering how fast his career had been pushed into the spotlight up to this point. For a fighter who came into the UFC with as much hype as any wrestling prospect in years, a 3-time NCAA champion with viral finishes early in his run, seeing him lose his main card billing marks a quiet but telling shift in how the promotion might be handling his trajectory after his first professional setback. Nickal's originally scheduled bout with Rodolfo Vieira was one of the more intriguing stylistic matchups on the UFC 322 lineup. Elite wrestling versus world-class jiu-jitsu, 2 specialists colliding in a fight that felt like a throwback to old-school MMA. It had the kind of built-in intrigue that usually earns fighters prime placement on a pay-per-view card, especially when it involves someone with Nickal's crossover appeal from the amateur wrestling world. But the UFC reshuffled the lineup just weeks before the event, promoting Beneil Dariush versus Benoit Saint-Denis to the main card instead, and sliding Nickal down to the featured prelim slot. Still a visible position, but not quite the spotlight he's used to. It's a notable change for a guy who's never fought outside the PPV portion since joining the UFC. Nickal made his debut on the main card at UFC 285, returned for the massive UFC 300 show, and even competed on last year's Madison Square Garden event, UFC 309. To now find himself on the prelims of another New York card feels like the first real humbling moment of his career, at least in terms of perception. It's also a reminder that the UFC, for all its hype building, doesn't hesitate to pull the reins on a prospect after a loss. That first defeat came earlier this year against Reinier de Ridder, a fight that exposed holes in Nickal's defensive grappling and composure under adversity. It was a valuable learning moment, but it also slowed the hype machine that had been running non-stop since his Contender Series debut. Moving him down to the prelims could be the UFC's subtle way of letting him rebuild without the intense scrutiny that comes with every main card slot. Nickal's reaction to the initial announcement was pure beau, half joking, half defiant. He posted on X that maybe his placement on the card was rage bait, hinting that the UFC might be stirring fan debate on purpose. He acknowledged that he still draws a crowd, particularly among American wrestling fans, and seemed unbothered by the move, keeping his tone optimistic about getting back in the octagon. That kind of mindset probably helps. For someone with his competitive background, being told to prove himself again is nothing new. Rodolfo Vieira remains a dangerous opponent, a multi-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion who's been steadily improving his MMA game. For Nickal, it's another chance to show that he can apply his wrestling dominance against an opponent who's just as lethal once the fight hits the mat. It's also a stylistic test that hardcore fans are eager to see, even if it isn't on the PPV broadcast. UFC 322 is stacked, with Islam Mokaev moving up to challenge Jack Della Maddalena and Valentina Shevchenko facing Zhang Weili in a rare champion versus champion fight. In that kind of lineup, it's not exactly shameful to be shifted down a spot. But for Nickal, it's a reminder that nothing is guaranteed in the UFC. The main card spotlight comes and goes, and a single stumble can send even a top prospect back to proving grounds. If anything, this could be the reset Nickal needs. Fewer distractions, less pressure, and the chance to remind people why he was such a big deal to begin with. A dominant win over Vieira would silence a lot of the talk about him being overhyped, while another stumble would raise serious questions about whether the UFC's push came too soon. Either way, the prelims might not be the punishment it looks like. It could just be the perfect place for Bo Nickal to start rebuilding his legend.
Alex Pereira, the reigning UFC light heavyweight champion and one of the most respected figures in modern MMA, stepped up to defend Tom Aspinall after a wave of backlash followed the heavyweight champion's unfortunate end at UFC 321. What was meant to be Aspinall's first undisputed title defense against Ciryl Gane quickly turned into a nightmare. A sudden, accidental eye poke that left him unable to see and forced the fight to be ruled a no contest just minutes into the opening round. In the days since, the MMA community hasn't exactly been kind. While some fans sympathized with Aspinall's situation, others questioned whether the injury was as severe as it seemed. Former UFC champions TJ Dillashaw and Aljamain Sterling were among those who publicly implied that Aspinall might have taken the easy way out, suggesting he quit rather than fight through the pain. The criticism spread quickly online, with debates flaring up over whether fighters should ever be questioned for injuries that stop a bout, especially one as sensitive and dangerous as an eye poke. But Pereira, who has seen his own share of controversy and adversity throughout his rise, didn't hesitate to back the British heavyweight. Speaking in an interview with MMA Hoje, the Brazilian knockout artist dismissed the idea that Aspinall faked or exaggerated the injury. "You can't really know what happened. Only he knows. I mean, we know he wasn't doing so well in the fight, but we've seen situations where a guy isn't doing great, then something happens, like a penalty, and the guy comes back better. Some people are saying he was faking it. Man, honestly, you can't say that. It's hard to understand. One poke seemed to go deeper in the eye, and he didn't complain about it, but he grabbed the other one from the outside. But we don't know the impact there either, you know?" Pereira's words carried a tone of empathy rather than judgment, a reminder that even for elite fighters, physical limits are real and not always visible from the outside. His defense of Aspinall also reflects a growing sentiment among fighters who've experienced the danger of eye pokes firsthand, the kind of injuries that can alter careers or even end them. For Pereira, this wasn't just a case of standing up for a fellow champion. It was also a recognition of how unpredictable and brutal the sport can be. Eye pokes, no matter how accidental, can instantly derail years of preparation. Aspinall, who had looked sharp in his run to the title and had revitalized a heavyweight division long dominated by John Jones's absence, now finds himself facing medical uncertainty. Reports from his camp suggest he's still unable to see out of one eye days after the fight, awaiting further testing to determine the extent of the damage. While Pereira unravels this MMA conundrum, other things have been moving for him at light heavyweight, where he defended his belt in spectacular fashion. He's openly teased a move to heavyweight, even going as far as to challenge Jon Jones for a potential super fight at the White House next year. It's a wild, audacious call-out that only Pereira could make, part showmanship, part genuine hunger for greatness. Yet as he flirts with the idea of becoming a three-division champion, Pereira's response to Aspinall's situation shows the human side of a fighter often known for his stoic intensity. He didn't take the bait to criticize, didn't speculate or pile on. Instead, he offered a fighter's understanding that when it comes to injuries inside the cage, only the person living that moment knows what's real. For Tom Aspinall, those words will likely mean something. Coming from one of the sport's most dangerous and respected competitors, Pereira's defense carries more weight than most. In a week filled with doubt and harsh commentary, it was a rare show of solidarity, one champion standing up for another in a sport that doesn't always show mercy to its wounded.
Dan Hooker seems completely reinvigorated as he prepares for his next challenge, a main event showdown with Arman Tsarukyan on November 22 in Qatar. The New Zealand lightweight has had a roller coaster run inside the UFC, but this time around, his focus and motivation are razor sharp. While many fans were hoping to see him face Justin Gaethje earlier this year, Hooker actually sees this matchup as the better opportunity, not just for excitement, but for his career trajectory. Justin Gaethje doesn't get me to that guy, Hooker said flatly in an interview with Sky Sports New Zealand. Justin Gaethje just gets me a headache. Arman Tsarukyan is the path to the title. That's the path to being the champ. That's the path to being the best guy. It's a telling quote that highlights Hooker's shift in mindset. He's no longer chasing brawls or crowd-pleasing wars, he's chasing the belt. Gaethje, while one of the most entertaining fighters in the world, doesn't hold the same position in the title picture as Tsarukyan. Arman has been steadily rising the ranks, earning a reputation as one of the most dangerous wrestlers in the division. Beating him, Hooker knows, puts him right in the conversation for a title shot, especially with Islam Mokaev potentially moving up to welterweight. For Hooker, this fight is not just another comeback attempt, it's a validation test. He enters as a heavy underdog at plus 310, but that's exactly the kind of challenge that gets him going. This fight excites me because they feel like he's a lot better than I am, Hooker said. That's why this fight excites me so much. Anything good that I do makes him look like more of an idiot. He's supposed to be this super freak athlete, title contender. They're hiding the champion from him. This is his story, and now he's losing to Dan Hooker, the bloke from New Zealand who's lost a third of his fights. It's classic Hooker, self-deprecating humor wrapped around a fighter's quiet defiance. He's aware of the narrative and the odds, but he also knows that the sport thrives on upsets. For him, every jab landed and every round won will chip away at Tsarukyan's aura of invincibility. Hooker's recent form has been quietly solid. Though injuries have kept him from staying consistently active, he's coming off back-to-back split decision wins over Jalen Turner and Mateusz Gamrot, both ranked dangerous opponents. Those fights showed flashes of the old hangman, the durable technical striker who could absorb punishment and keep pressing forward. But more importantly, they showed a version of Hooker who's patient and calculating, willing to pick his moments rather than walk into fire. Tsarukyan, meanwhile, represents a very different stylistic puzzle. Known for his relentless wrestling and explosive transitions, he's been pegged as a future title contender ever since pushing Mokaev to the limit in his UFC debut. He's young, hungry, and carries the kind of momentum that often sweeps through divisions. Hooker isn't pretending otherwise. He knows exactly what kind of storm he's stepping into. I feel like he's the one with something to prove, Hooker said. That's a difficult spot for a fighter to be in. It's that psychological angle that makes this fight compelling. Hooker has been the underdog before, against Poirier, Chandler, and Felder, and he's learned how to weaponize that underestimation. If he can survive the early wrestling onslaught and drag Tsarukyan into deeper waters, the tide could turn in his favor. At 34, Hooker doesn't have endless runs left in him, but he's fighting smarter now, picking moments that matter. A win in Qatar would be career-altering, propelling him into immediate title contention and giving him the chance to finally make good on years of grinding at the top level. For now, though, the Hangman seems content to let everyone doubt him, because that's when he's most dangerous.
Muhammad Mokaev's exit from the UFC remains one of the strangest stories in recent memory. An undefeated top 10 contender released from the promotion at just 25 years old. After 7 fights, a spotless record, and a win over Manel Kape, the UFC chose not to renew his contract, with Dana White vaguely citing bad shit behind the scenes and claiming the matchmakers weren't big fans. The comments hit Mokaev harder than the release itself, not because he lost his spot on the roster, but because his name was suddenly being dragged through the mud. For Mokaev, the frustration wasn't about money or opportunity, it was about reputation. He said, "If I did something wrong, I wouldn't get upset. But when you don't do anything and people make you look like a bad guy, that's what hurts. If I was so hard to deal with, the UFC wouldn't have kept me for 7 fights. They renewed my contract twice. If I was really a problem, they'd have cut me straight away." Since signing with Brave CF, Mokaev has found a home where he feels respected. The promotion immediately gave him a title shot, and officials have called him a consummate professional, a sharp contrast to how he was painted in his UFC exit. He revealed that several organizations reached out once he became a free agent, including PFL, who even offered him a chance to fight Patchy Mix for the bantamweight title on short notice. "They offered me to step into the Grand Prix on 10 days' notice. I said yes, but I couldn't get the visa in time. That's what really got me upset. People saying PFL didn't want me when it wasn't true." Despite how things ended, Mokaev holds no grudges toward the UFC. In fact, he credits the organization for building his name and helping him establish financial stability. He said, "They gave me a platform, they paid me well, and they helped me get to where I am. I was renting before, now I have my own home. I'll always be thankful for that. I don't hate anyone, I'm just continuing my dream." Ironically, the release might have made him even more famous. He said, "I think getting cut actually made my name bigger. People who didn't know me before now know who I am, the undefeated guy who got released from the UFC. If I ever come back, all eyes will be on the flyweight division. Brave champion versus UFC champion. Imagine that." For now, Mokaev is focused on what's next. He's preparing for his flyweight title bout on November 7th and says Brave has treated him better than he could have imagined. He said, "I think I'm the highest paid flyweight in the world right now. They take care of me, they listen, they let me be part of the business. I can walk into the office, sit down with the president, and talk for hours about my future. They support me in everything, not just as a fighter, but as a person." The UFC conversation will always follow him, but Mokaev seems content where he is, free of drama, financially secure, and finally in control of his own story. If a return to the octagon ever happens, it'll be on his terms. Until then, he's set on proving that his career didn't peak in the UFC, it only started there.